We are at the state capitol right here, and this is important because this is the last day I'm going to be at this state capitol. This is the annex here of our historic state capitol, where it's about 60 years old, and we're moving across the street. So this is an interesting time. People are packing and moving across the street. Interesting time for me because I started working here at the state capitol about 25 years ago as an intern. So it's a little bit eerie and kind of sentimental coming back here, seeing everything boxed up at the end of an era. But we'll be going across the street for a few years, and hopefully during my last term, we'll be back here at the new annex, which will be better for the public. It'll be better for people to come on field trips with kids, and better for the public to come testify on important bills, and for people who go about their work. So this is always the public's house, and it's going to be the focus of having a facility that makes sense for California and the community to talk to their government. So it's interesting that I'm here as we're shutting down the state capitol. I wanted to be here one last time. But today here I have about an hour with you to talk about legislation. I'm, of course, your assembly member for the 7th District, which is the city's West Sacramento and the majority of the city of Sacramento. We're currently going through these map changes, so we're not sure where this will all flush out, but I am the representative here for this district for at least the next year, and then I'll be probably in a different configuration after that. And just wanted to be here with you today to talk about what we're doing here at the state capitol as your representative. I really want to not talk very long at the beginning and turn it over to you to allow you to ask me questions or give me suggestions. This was an eventful year at the Capitol. We're going through certainly the COVID-19 protocols and having to have limited public participation in person because of the pandemic and COVID. But the show goes on for the majority of what we do. And the biggest thing that I focus on is I chair the budget committee overseeing education from early education to K-12 through higher ed. So those are some of my biggest highlights and my proudest accomplishments this past year is what we did in that space as far as the budget through education. We were able to finally make my top bill a reality here in California. That's universal preschool for all 4-year-olds to have free pre-K in California via our transitional kindergarten program. And many of you have known, I've been saying this for years, that, and you may know because you've seen it firsthand with your family, it's very expensive to put your 4-year-old in private preschool. I always tell people it costs more to do that than go to UC Berkeley per month. And so we're making it free for all families. So it'll be great for middle-class families who have a tough time paying that bill. Also great for families who are low income and on waiting lists who don't have a spot. So this will be free at every elementary school throughout California. I want to highlight 3 of my top highlights for the top accomplishments for this year and then get to you. The second one that I'm really excited about is my top district project is making improvements to our American River Parkway, which is the jewel of Sacramento. 8 million people a year visit our parkway. Some locations on the parkway, up in the more affluent areas closer to Folsom have frankly better public access. So we're looking at changing that down here in the area from Sac State to Discovery Park, thinking about areas like Sutter's Landing Park, the Wood Lake area, and down in that area. So that's one of my big highlights. We were able to get $12 million to improve the parkway. And lastly, one thing I'm always super excited about is higher education. We had a big win this year, dramatically expanding access to the University of California. I've been pushing to decrease non-resident enrollment and increase more California students, and we were successful. And we have 7,000 new slots going to qualified California students this year. So excited about our progress we made in 2021 and ready to get back at it in 2022. But you know what? I would really want to hear from you. So let's stop with my introductory stuff and get to your questions and comments. So with that, let's go to the questions. And where will I see the questions? Okay. Just hold on one sec.
Okay, just not here. It's in the Q&A section.
That's
We
right.
have some.
Right here.
There you go.
Okay, here we go. The first live question is, can we hear the impact of the infrastructure bill for SAC and California? That's a question from Lynn. That is a question that is, that issue is frankly because of the federal bill. That's the infrastructure bill that President Biden signed about 2 weeks ago. Ironically, I was in DC for meetings that week, and I got to go see the president sign that bill. So that was pretty neat being at the White House, seeing him sign that. And that is, a $1 trillion investment throughout our nation for our roads, bridges, airports, water systems, things like electric charging vehicle network across California, things like solar and clean energy. That you're going to see a massive impact in the coming years to come. So it won't be some won't happen right away, but again, that's a federal issue. But some of those monies will go to the state of California. We will implement them. Okay. Other question. What changes can we make legislatively to the direct democracy system? I'm tired of being manipulated by uber wealthy corporations, special interests, both for the good of the state and political interests. We got to fix this one. That's, we saw this, frankly, through the recall. I think it was a total waste of money. We spent nearly, I think about $500 million on election costs for this recall we just saw. We have an election in a few months. So that's one thing we need to reform is, I think, the process of putting things on the ballot through the initiative, the recall, and the referendum. As you probably know, these things were created about 100 years ago, ironically, for citizens to basically counter back against the wealthy and the corporations and special interests. And now, 100 years later, they're being utilized by the corporations. So it's kind of funny how that turned. And it was the Hiram Johnson, the governor at the time, that put this pot process through the Constitution, and it's now law in California. So in order to change that, you have to go back to the voters. And so I believe specifically for the recall, we will see something. I think direct democracy is a good thing, having the citizenry be able to put things on the ballot. But I think there are ways that we can focus on that to make sure it's really about citizens and communities and not really wealthy special interests. What are my plans for police reform and can you hand me my bag because my water's in there? Police reform and homelessness. So those are two separate issues. I'll take one first. So as far as police reform, that is an ongoing issue. I think California has, I think it's right there, has done a lot in the last few years to tackle police reform. I was proud that a couple of the bills the governor signed were my bills to bring about police reform. One issue that the governor signed is my bill that has the Attorney General now investigate officer-involved shootings, that the Attorney General's office, as opposed to the local DA, will be the ones doing the investigations for officer-involved shootings. I think there's a conflict of interest with local DAs doing that work. And so that's now the law of the land, and Attorney General Bonta's doing that. We did have a major bill a couple of years ago, which Dr. Weber and I worked on together, which changes the definition of when officers can use deadly force to make sure it's, only when it's absolutely necessary as far as a response, so that, as opposed to when before the law was when reasonable. And so this changes that threshold to make sure that we've changed our practices to bring about fewer deadly force incidents. And the goal of this isn't to focus on necessarily holding police accountable when they cross the line, which does need to happen, is to change the practices. So what can we do to focus on de-escalation and have police departments use alternative means to prevent the loss of human life? And then another big bills on police reform were signed last year. One was decertifying officers that do cross the line. As you know, sometimes officers, you know, have some bad practices, excessive force, you know, unlawful shootings that lead to the death of individuals. And, you know, before they're fired or disciplined, they quit and go and work at a different police department. And we know that other professions, if you're a teacher, a doctor, or even work at a nail salon, if you, you know, act inappropriately and the board that governs you and your practices finds that, you know, they'll sanction you and you can lose your license. But it's really hard to do that in the police business up until this year. So the governor signed this necessary reform. So I think that is significant. There's still other ways that we need to go about, you know, making improvements in our communities. You know, I think that I'm really pleased by the efforts of cities, including Sacramento, and a bill that I had signed by the governor to focus on how we can have you know, alternatives to police response for lower level mental health calls when you know, maybe law enforcement isn't necessarily needed, and save law enforcement for, you know, responding to imminent violence and real threats to the community. I think we can focus on what type of personnel we have out there responding to so many of these calls, which, as we know, so many times are when someone's in a crisis situation. Sometimes the person is in imminent danger to themselves or somebody else with a weapon and so forth. So yeah, law enforcement needs to respond to those calls. But other times you can have, you know, other type of personnel, whether they're social workers or other professionals, go out there and respond to some of these calls, where we could have a different type of response. You know, I don't support the whole notion of defunding the police. I think that's a misnomer, and I think we need to have law enforcement in our communities, but we could do things differently. I think we can do things differently and utilize government taxpayer funded money for response for some of these 911 calls to make sure we get the best outcomes. Some of this question here was about homelessness too, and in law enforcement, homelessness doesn't always have you know, the interaction. But I think too, we're seeing this issue here with crime and homelessness and addiction, and sometimes a circle of all of these things. And I think that one of the issues that I'd like to address is how we can respond to these and how we can, you know, bring about new solutions, because the current system isn't always working. You know, one idea that I have is we can bring about more treatment, whether they're for addiction or mental health crisis that we're seeing on the streets, that many times relate to, you know, how this impacts crime in different communities as well. You know, I think we should have more sometimes, you know, mandatory treatment for individuals who are experiencing a mental health crisis in our community. We used to have these conservatorship laws where people, if they're really in danger to themselves and the community, can get help. And really now it's super hard, and families report that, you know, it's hard to get their loved ones into treatment. So I think that we need to look outside the box and bring about solutions to that. For example, I had a bill that we signed, that I authored last year, that was actually vetoed by the governor, which stated that it would create a pilot project in Yolo County where if individuals are arrested for a serious felony, and it can be proven and shown by the courts that it was related to drug addiction, that they would have an opportunity to go get treatment as opposed to incarceration. So I think it's a common sense idea. If someone's going to go serve, you know, a year in a state prison or county jail, you know, and get no drug treatment, maybe we should encourage them and give them the opportunity to go get treatment in lieu of their incarceration. And hopefully when they get released, they'll be less likely to have an addiction that leads to their behavior, which got them arrested in the first place. So I think we need to bring about more ideas to this. There's no easy answer. Homelessness is an issue, but the correlation between homelessness and addiction, mental health, and crime, we see it in our own communities. And I think California needs to step up and bring about more solutions. So you got to hold on one second. I need a water break. Okay, we have a bunch of questions here that people are asking, and then we have some that people sent in. So I'm going to do a couple more of questions that people are asking live, and then I'm going to get to some questions that that people had submitted earlier. Okay, let me see. Like this. I like this one. Here we go. California currently has a $30 billion surplus. We've had a surplus for several years in a row. What's the chance of providing more high quality mental health services for Californians, especially our young people and all socioeconomic backgrounds? Our youth are also suffering. Also, a lot of our unhoused neighbors need mental health support. That's a good question. We, as we know, we've been in a global pandemic for the last 2 years now, and it's had a big impact early on our state budget. We saw a massive decline in revenues coming in that first year, in large part because the economy shut down. People weren't out there shopping, paying sales tax. Stores shut down for the first 6 months, and so we had to make major adjustments right away in 2020. However, with the response from the federal government and state government, we were able to get our economy back going on. Not for everybody. I realize some people are still struggling. Some people are still out of work, which is why we get requests for help with their unemployment. And some people, especially in the service sector jobs, haven't really been able to get back to where they are. But ironically, in the last year and a half, our economy has been booming more than we've ever seen. And so we have a huge infusion of money coming into the state budget, of which we have, as Alexandria notes here, about a $30 billion surplus. Some of that is ongoing money, and some of that's one time. In other words, think about like super wealthy people like Elon Musk and, the owner of Amazon. What's the guy's name? Bezos. Yes, yeah. Mr. Bezos. So they sell their stocks and they cash out, and they have a lot of capital gains. And so when that tax revenue comes into the state, it's because of a one-time act of their selling a lot of their stocks. And so that's money coming in, billions of dollars. We call it one time. So we can't use that to hire, for example, more teachers, mental health programs and services on an ongoing basis. So a lot of that is used for one time. So we have to use that to make sure we keep that money. We put a lot of it in what we call a rainy day reserve. So if the economy ever does have a massive dip, we do have an opportunity to fill the void in the state budget to hopefully get out of that recession. Also, by law, about half of that goes to schools and education funding, but it will allow us to look at things, how we want to do things differently in California. And I love President Biden's slogan that he said when he was running for president, that after this recession, we should build back better. We shouldn't just go to where we were, because where we were, for so many people, they were already left behind. As you say, Alexandria, some people were suffering, and some people, especially in our communities and social economic backgrounds without a lot of resources, it was never good for them pre-pandemic. So we're trying to build back better. With that said, there will be, I think, an opportunity to do some ongoing things in mental health in the area that I work on for the education. We did last year put a lot of money for schools and for early education, K-12 and higher ed, to have more mental health services. And that I think you're going to see a difference in this next year with them ramping up and hiring more mental health professionals in that. We do actually need to look at what things that we can use that one-time money for. I have an idea dealing with housing and student housing. We do have a housing crisis in California. Especially, we have a housing crisis for people who are going to college and living near a college campus. So I proposed recently, and I'll be pushing forward, a bill to spend $5 billion of those one-time dollars on housing for student housing throughout California. at our college campuses, which will allow the current students to have, more affordable and better places to live and study near their campus and graduate, but also help us in some of these cities that have a college already and they have a massive housing imbalance. And so providing more housing for students, helps spillover impact on housing overall. So that's one issue that I'm working on. Let's get back to homelessness. We had a couple of questions here locally about efforts to remove homeless encampments along the American River Parkway. And I talked earlier, one of my top highlights of this year was getting about $12 million to improve public access to the parkway. And some have said, well, that's great, Kevin, but the real issue there along the parkway isn't always lack of public access. It's homelessness and homeless camps that make it, not enjoyable to visit nor safe. And so I don't disagree. I go down there to the parkway quite often with my family or by myself or my dog or friends and so forth. And I see it firsthand. So, a few things that one, I think more public access brings more positive activity down there, which can address some of the negative elements. So that's, I think, number one. And we've seen that happen all across society for generations. But I think the bigger issue there is that's not enough. What else do we need to do to get people off of the parkway? So in my job as an assembly member, what we've been doing is approving in the budget monies to go to cities and counties to pay for shelter. So for example, last year we put over $1 billion in the budget. Now for 2 years in a row, and about 100 million or more has gone to the city of Sacramento to focus on shelter beds. So the ones you see under the freeway over there in the Oak Park area near Alhambra and Broadway. There's been some tiny home proposals throughout the city. There's some temporary facilities over under the freeway where they used to have the farmers market over there in Sacramento. And there are about 20 sites throughout Sacramento to deal with the estimated nearly 10,000 homeless individuals in the county of Sacramento right now, which is about a twofold increase from just about 5 years ago. So we do need to increase dramatically the number of beds. On the parkway, I have a big plan that was just that I've been supporting along with our county and local leaders, which would use some of the land near Cal Expo to do a camp there. Not a camp per se, but a homeless facility, which is either a combination of tiny homes, tents, kind of sprung shelter there to get people off of the parkway. And we estimate this could serve up to 300 individuals at this site, just next to the horse race track near Cal Expo, outside of the Cal Expo grounds, adjacent to the parkway down there. And it'll help us get people off of the parkway. So the priority there is going to be physically removing people, or giving them options. It's not good for them. It's not safe for them. It's not safe for the parkway to get off of the parkway and onto this facility over here near Cal Expo. I also am going to be working with the mayor this year. He's supporting an idea that government should focus on having the obligation to make sure that all unhoused people have a place to sleep. And with that, I think there's some responsibility as well. So if you're an individual and you want to camp on the sidewalk, I don't think that's right eventually. When we have enough shelter beds and facilities for people to go, then I think we should start enforcing the no camping laws throughout California and here in Sacramento, because frankly, it's not good for unhoused people. And it's not good for our communities as well. This morning, one of my constituents sent me a picture of some young kids, whether they're kids or teenagers, walking to Sac State in the middle of the road on a foggy street under the freeway over there off Reading Avenue, because a few homeless camps were blocking the sidewalk. So individuals, unfortunately, don't have a place to go. I get that, but also it has other impacts as well, where young people don't have an opportunity to walk safely to school. So this program over there at Cal Expo and Z, I think is really going to help address some of the issues with the supply of housing for the homeless here in Sacramento. And I do support, once we do have enough beds to show that can match the need, that we should start enforcing the no camping laws throughout Sacramento. Let's see. There are so many good questions. I can't get to them all. So I'm trying to find some that are kind of broad and that kind of addresses some of the issues I'm going to be working on in 2022. So changing the topic here to the climate and the environment. Susan writes that the state really wants to reduce how much people are driving, reduce climate emissions. All jobs that were able to be successfully switched to remote working should stay at the remote or hybrid. That is an issue that we are really thinking about in government, but frankly, all sectors of the economy as well, is after this pandemic, how can we go back to work, and what could we learn from the pandemic with teleworking? You know, some jobs clearly aren't that. Think about service industry jobs, restaurants, schools, childcare, fire, public service jobs like, municipal, the solid waste departments, fire, police, law enforcement. Yeah, we need to have people in person doing that work. But there are a great number of jobs that people can work from home, and they did a good job. People figured it out. Not everybody had adequate telecommunication and broadband, but millions of Californians figured it out. So I think going back to where we were is probably not going to be the best way forward for employers and even state of California. So we're going to think as far as how we can do things differently. People could do some work remotely, and maybe it's going to improve their quality of life. Maybe it's going to allow them to do more things like take their kids to school and pick up their kids after school and still do the work that needs to be done. So, I'm open to that, not only for the state, but also my own people that work for me. We've been focusing on that as well. That will have an impact, as you mentioned, on people driving, fewer cars on the road as well. I want to make sure that it works for everybody. I will say that may be good for the workforce and some employees and some employers, but for me, it has a big impact on Sacramento and downtown. I represent, of course, the state capitol, and this downtown is a government town. And so not having people show up to work here is really freaking out restaurants, the commerce industry downtown or central city. So livelihood of that industry for years has been, the state workforce. So having, 20, 30, 40, 50%, something like that, not go to work for the future will have a big impact downtown, and we're gonna have to figure that out. But, I think first and foremost, my job is to make sure that we do what makes most sense for California and for our employees. But I will use that hat too to focus on make sure it makes sense for the state of California and also our local downtown merchants. Focusing on another issue on climate change and what we can do here to reduce our carbon footprint. We just had the big global conference on climate change and coming out with ideas what California can do. As we probably know, some of the major drivers of emissions and one of the negative impacts on our climate, our environment, are automobiles. That's the largest contributor to both real pollution. Think about the smog and the small particulate pollution floating in the air that impacts our lungs, but also impacts, the ozone layer up there too, our cars, automobiles. So I have legislation I'll be working on again this year, which will help us transition to more cleaner cars, electric cars, hybrid cars. Eventually, the goal is in about 10 years to have all of new cars sold in California to be non-internal combustion engines. Think about the new products that are coming out there, whether they're the Ford F-150 that we see in the news, or the Teslas, or Chevy Bolt, or the new Ford Mustang. There are plenty of options now, and every year more and more. The exciting thing about these new electric vehicles is the range is getting longer, so you don't have to charge every 40 or 60 miles. The majority of these new products have a range that's 200 miles plus, which is almost a full tank of gas. We're getting there, and we're getting more and more charging stations throughout California. We're seeing them pop up everywhere we look. I offered legislation this year to make it easier to streamline the construction of them. And then the president's Build Back Better legislation and the infrastructure bill and state monies as well have put a lot of resources to dramatically improve the number of charging stations you'll see throughout California. So I think that is going to make it more economically viable for people. And then lastly, the price of these cars have gone down dramatically, and with rebates, they really aren't much more expensive than a non-electric car. So we're seeing the change. One thing that I'm trying to do, all these auto manufacturers are saying they're going to make the change by this year. I'm trying to lock in those goals to make sure that, focus on the old adage, trust and verify. The manufacturers are saying, hey, trust us, we're going to swap out all of our cars to be clean cars by the year 2030, 2035. And I'm working on legislation that would lock in those goals to actual markers of achievement. So stay tuned for that bill in 2022. Let's see. I'm going to just keep bouncing around on different topics because I know we have so many good questions and not enough time. So somebody asked here about, where would it go? About transitional kindergarten. This is the new law that I talked about earlier, which makes free pre-K available for all California 4-year-olds. And this, I think, is going to be a game changer for student achievement, to make sure that kids have a head start when they go on to enter kindergarten. They have quality early education experience to help address that opportunity gap. Because let's face it, so many of our kids start kindergarten. Used to be able to start kindergarten, everyone's starting at the same spot, but now so many of our kindergartners start behind, and they never catch up. So having good early education before kindergarten makes a big difference. So this question from Lindsay at verse 5 is making sure that that teachers will reflect the diversity of Sacramento, and existing pre-K childcare providers have the opportunity, and noting that they do, so much of what I'm not sure. Yeah, they make sure that they are taken care of, because they do so much what our K-12 teachers do as well. So this law that I authored, again, I think is going to be a difference maker for education in California and for families to have, free access for pre-K now for their 4-year-olds. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a 4 to 5 year transition. So this year is a planning year. So not until next July will the law actually really kick in, and then we'll gradually expand the existing TK program to bring in more students and teachers. So that's one of the big things that we need to do, is hire more early educators, whether they're childcare providers or TK teachers. There is a lot of opportunity for jobs in this field. So I think people in the current field should not worry. They will have a job, and they will have opportunities for, frankly, advancement. We're paying teachers more in our rate structure through our budget as well. We're also going to be hiring more teachers through the TK program, and they'd be able to get, the equivalent salary of a K-12 teacher. So dramatically expand their economic opportunities. And the majority of the teachers, as we know, that work in pre-K now are women and women of color. And I think that'll continue to to be the reality. So there will be plenty of career opportunities for individuals that want to be early educators. But we are going to try to make it easier. One idea that I have here is giving more financial aid for people who want to go to the community colleges and get education to get a credential, to offer them free tuition, and also try to make sure we have more community colleges have course offerings. So both those proposals will be in this year's budget as far as providing one-time money to help make TK implementation work for everybody. Okay, this is a question from Mr. Weber, who wants to know about healthcare costs and the quality of life, and what are we doing to support universal healthcare. I do support universal healthcare. I support the Affordable Care Act through Obamacare. Through that we have about 90% of people in California have healthcare. Still roughly 10% by that math do not. All those people are people who are just lost in the shadows. They don't have proper documentation, and they're working in different industries where they don't have an employer that provides it, and so they go get healthcare by going to the emergency room, which makes it unsafe, frankly, for all of us when people aren't go getting preventative healthcare and taking care of themselves. Think about the flu and COVID and so forth, but also it doesn't work for our economy when people can't go to work and or go to work when they're sick. So having, I think, a universal healthcare is time. We can focus on efficiencies. We already have publicly funded government healthcare through Medicare, for seniors in Medicare, through people who are indigent through Medi-Cal, and through veterans. And so I think we can look at the best practices through that and cut out some of the unnecessary spending in the middle. So I have been a co-author of AB 1400. We're still working on the financing structure to make that a reality. In the interim, we are trying to expand access for healthcare. This past year in our state budget, we did just that, having more seniors who are undocumented in California being eligible for our California system of healthcare. The federal government, through the President Biden's Build Back Better Act, has some money in that to expand on Obamacare. So we're slowly but surely getting there, not fast enough, but I realize that healthcare is a major issue for so many Californians. It's one of the top reasons that people file for bankruptcy, is because they have massive bills for their medical needs. I have a question from Deborah here. She wants to know, what changes in law could we do to make it less expensive to build necessary housing? There are a few things that we can do. One I support is looking at the Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. I know that no one ever wants to change it. Former Governor Jerry Brown used to call it God's work, looking at CEQA reform. But I still think there are unnecessary challenges. Sometimes NIMBY organizations that don't want housing built, that fight housing, that use lawsuits and get in the way and abuse the system. So I do support that, looking at the CEQA process to focusing on housing. But the reality is that is only one issue. There are issues that some local governments don't want to build housing. Some cities don't want to build more apartments, for example. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a law and the governor embraced it and put it in. We adopted in the budget, which says if you're a city, you need to make sure that you build your required amount of apartment dwellings in your community. It shouldn't be borne upon urban cities like Sacramento to fill the apartment needs of cities. I won't name them by name, but you know who they are in the outskirts around Sacramento. So that's an important question. Kelly here asked a question as far as ideas for increasing our housing stock throughout Sacramento. The one idea that I'm talking about is increasing funds to build student housing, but I also support laws like we just adopted this year in the city of Sacramento is looking at doing to make it easier to build duplexes and triplexes. Essentially there have been laws that made it, almost illegal to build some of these duplexes and triplexes in single family communities throughout Sacramento and California. I think that's just short-sighted. We have a lot of neighborhoods that have big lots and appropriate sized lots where they can subdivide them and build 2 houses where there's already infrastructure in place. There's already water and sewer and trash and streets, parking. And then, some of these areas, some of the places, some people aren't using automobiles as much. We've noticed that in the central cities, some of the new residents haven't signed up and wanted a spot for their car. And so in some of these areas, cars are necessary, but others, they're clearly not. I still think the city of Sacramento will have opportunities to make sure that parking is addressed, and so we don't overrun certain streets if there's too many duplexes, for example, permitted on one street. But overall, I think that's a good example that we could do here in Sacramento. Let's see here. There are just too many good questions. What time? How much more time do we have?
We have 8 minutes, but we can go over.
Okay, yeah, about 10 or so more minutes here. See a lot of homeless questions here. So let me just focus on more of that, on legislation for housing affordability and homeless. We have allocated in the last 3 budgets, I think, north of $3 billion to cities to focus on homelessness, and we've had mixed results. Some have said we see in more people becoming homeless. You see it in some of our streets. There's more tents out there. Some of that is to do that we haven't been able to address the current population, and then we have more people coming in. More people coming in. Frankly, they're not getting bussed in from Oklahoma or other states like I think these wild rumors speculate, but there are people getting squeezed out. There are people that have eviction notices that are month to month, or they're couch surfing, and then they lose it all, and all of a sudden they're sleeping in a car, and all of a sudden they're in a tent. And so I think a few things here that we need to focus on: stabilizing people who are on the verge of homelessness to not have an increase in our homeless population. So I support things like rent stabilization. I know that's kind of a loaded topic on rent control per se, but I think you could have it where a rent stabilization is basically anti-rent gouging. So property owners can increase rents by, I think the laws, I think it's 4 or 5% plus CPI. So basically increases of less than 10% per year, which I know some people would think are too much, but having rent increases by 20 and 30 and 40%, really put people at risk, especially because wages are increasing at that amount. So I do support that as far as how we can make rental housing more stable here in California. I also think that there's much that we could do to focus on, building more, more homeless facilities. I know the city of Sacramento, and I support our mayor and our city council for coming up with homeless locations throughout Sacramento, making sure they're not all in certain neighborhoods, which you have an undue burden. I think that, wealthy neighborhoods from East Sac to Thomas to Curtis Park to the Pocket, we all have our responsibility to step up. At Land Park, I know that, some folks I hear sometimes in my neighborhoods, in my districts, don't like seeing what they see on their streets or in their parks or underneath certain roads, near the freeways. but don't necessarily like the solutions for homeless facilities in those same locations. And so I kind of say you can't have it both ways. So I think we all need to step up and approve those. And so now I think is the time that we need to focus on accountability. We've given cities money for multiple years now, including my city of Sacramento. We're permitting these sites the city is, and so we really need to see now more beds and options opened up for homeless individuals and unhoused throughout Sacramento. And then also, I support what the mayor is talking about doing is once we have an appropriate number of housing beds for the population that's unhoused, to go and focus on holding communities and people out there are homeless accountable. You can't still be sleeping on these streets or in parks in certain areas, because not only is it probably not good for you and your health and your direction in life, but it's not good for the communities which we all live. So let's see. I'm just going to read some comments here on those questions. Here's a comment from Judy. Wants me to make sure that we work next year on job retraining and placement for in jail and prison to reduce prison populations. I 100% agree. I think that there's a big debate about criminal justice in California, and some people think that we should have fewer people in jail and prison, and some people think that we should have more. But if you take a step back, everybody in California would have a view that people who aren't currently in prison or jail, in other words, people who aren't locked up now, we should help them become successful and not become a statistic as far as recidivism. So, that's why I've been working over the years. I've worked on a bill as far as job applications to, have that criminal box not there at the outset. So give people a fair chance to get a job, and then, people's backgrounds be located and inquired later on in the hiring process. That's been very successful to help make sure we focus on employment. I think, housing is key. I had a bill that became law last year, which allows people to focus on community college enrollment while they're still incarcerated. And once people are released from prison, to help them succeed at a community college. I also have worked on legislation. I want to expand it to help people enter the Conservation Corps and volunteer programs upon incarceration, or, firefighter type opportunities. This all leads to the same issue: is how do we make sure that people who have been released from prison succeed and they don't, become a repeat offender and harm themselves and our communities as well. So I think that's a major issue that we need to work on. And frankly, one that is bipartisan. I've been authoring bills with Republicans and Democrats as well. So that's a good suggestion. And I think we have about 5 more minutes. Someone is asking a question on plastic bags. Any interest in banning reusable plastic bags and transitioning to paper or cloth? I'm just trying to get rid of the amount of plastic we have in the first place. And so I think that should be our top priority right now. There is a ballot measure on this, so the people of California will get to vote on this in the next election. So let's see. Okay, I have a few more minutes. Let's find some that questions that wrote in. Okay, here's a local question related to my bill on AB 777, which is a local bill. People who are in the heart of my district know about UC Davis and the Aggie Square area. Somebody want an update on that. That's a bill which would allow, there's currently a Department of Justice crime lab there right off of Broadway. The crime lab is looking to move into a new modern location and consolidate with another crime lab from the Bay Area, have a bigger one here in Sacramento. And they're looking to locate next to Sac State in some old industrial area behind the Home Depot back there, if you know Sacramento area. So what I'm looking to do is when that happens, what can we do to reutilize that piece of land for a purpose that would help Sacramento and the area around UC Davis Med Center. So I'm looking to utilize that for housing. You know, we have a housing crisis over and over. We see these questions. And the more housing we have there for UC Davis, people who go there to school there, the medical school, the nursing school, the postdoc students there, I think will really help those students, but also help the surrounding areas. Will be less gentrification and more housing around for the community. So, you know, it's not a panacea. We think that potentially this, 20-acre site could build anywhere between, let's say 500 to 1,000 housing units there. So that would really help the housing situation in that area of Sacramento. This is a good question on broadband. Somebody wants to know how the infrastructure bill, which has, which will have tens of millions of dollars for California. The individual says 100 million. I'm not sure if that's accurate. I think it's more than that. And then in our budget last year, we also implemented $6 billion in the budget to expand broadband throughout California. Something that we saw that really struck me last year was during the pandemic, that some people were able to do well and some weren't with computers and internet access. My kids were able to succeed. We had, multiple devices and computers and, good Wi-Fi system where they're able to figure it out. Some families don't. Some families, their Wi-Fi connection is mom's, mobile device. And they're using hotspots, and that, they get kicked off and they have to go to a park to do their homework. And we saw those, heartbreaking pictures about a year and a half ago, these two little kids in Salinas at a Taco Bell doing their homework next to the drive-through. And they were, I think, 10 and 11 years old. And that was a place they had to go get internet to do their homework. And so that just really showed us about, broadband is a necessity, kind of like water and the basics, electricity. And so it needs to be a reality for people to succeed in this society. So a lot of what we hear about broadband is the rural areas not having access, which is important. And I don't want to diminish that. I don't have many rural areas in my district, as you know, but we have a lot of people in the community that don't have access to broadband. So something that I'd like to see implemented, which I'm fighting for, is what can we do to give basic accounts, to give more affordable accounts to everybody who, let's say, has an income under a certain level. So like if you're a family that qualifies for certain government programs, we should make it so you can get an internet access at your house for, $20 a month or something that's really affordable. So that's something that I'd like to see. And we're going to see that implemented right away here in California. So I think it's going to go to help that in the urban areas, but also focus on a lot of California, which we don't have the necessary existing infrastructure. So let's talk about criminal justice reform for the last few minutes. I know it's a hot topic. We get emails about it a lot. We see, images on the TV about, the smash and grab burglaries in San Francisco at the high-end stores, and examples about here in Sacramento where we've had some horrific incidents of people who are in the criminal justice system on parole or probation, reoffending and, doing really bad stuff, including murder. And so it's an issue that I'm, well aware of. And I think that you can have smart criminal justice reform and keep communities safe. And what I've seen is that the public is really concerned about crime, and my constituents are as well. But we don't necessarily want to go back to, the solution isn't going back to the 1990s, which was mass incarceration. So what I'm focused on is what can we do to bring about support programs to help people that have been in the criminal justice system, have them succeed, and give them support systems to make sure they don't reoffend. I do concur. There's some people that have been arrested for crimes that are out on bail, who had serious offenses that maybe should not be. And so I think that people who have serious offenses and they're waiting for their court date, we need to make sure that they're not released and they are properly in the system, waiting for their opportunity through the judicial system. So I do think we need to take a look at that. But overall, I don't think the answer is going back to 3 strikes and mass incarceration. It's what can we do to bring about a smarter criminal justice system. One big issue that I'm going to focus on again in 2022 is I think there are people that are offending and reoffending, and they're slipping through the cracks, and they're not being held accountable. So I think that we need to, for example, drug treatment. I think we need to find more ways to bring about treatment for individuals who don't want to, choose that door. And I think that, we're seeing the impact on our communities today over and over and over. So that's one issue, whether it's through that or through people in the mental health system, through the conservatorship program, and be able to bring about more people to bring them in against their will who are harming themselves and our communities. I think we need to focus on that. I think that the current reforms that we had, 40 years ago aren't working. And so we need to relook at our justice system. And again, not go back and bring not mass incarceration, but bring smarter things like more treatment, more interventions through drug and mental health programs, and focus on supporting people who are former offenders do well with job opportunities, housing, and so forth. So, these are a lot of issues that I'm committed to. And most importantly, this is not an easy job here, and there are no easy answers, but I'm committed to working with you and listening to your ideas and questions and comments, being here in Sacramento in the seat of government to bring about some real solutions. So thank you for joining me here today. I realize that by me doing this town hall, not having guest speakers, I get out of breath after an hour. So, I need to take a glass of water now, but thank you again. And hopefully we'll get to do these in person sometime in the near future. But until then, I appreciate you engaging and asking me questions and allowing me to be your representative. So this is my last time here at the state capitol. So you can take a look around my office here. That's outside the capitol. As you can see, we're all packing up our boxes and everything, and we're going to be going over to the new capitol across the street in a few days. So this is the state annex, 70 years, a lot of history here, but time for a new era in California politics.